Some people will tell you that this should have happened weeks ago. Well, it didn't, but it's happened today. FAMU has hired their new head coach, and they kept it in-house with James Colzie. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusions. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. And if you're new to FanDuel, you get $150 back in bonus bets, no matter win or lose on your first $5 bet. We wrap up today's episode with a look at Norfolk State women's basketball's big victory over Coppin State, but we kick it off with a two-parter. We'll look at the importance in 2024 and why this James Colzie hiring will be best for the roster in this calendar year. However, I want to kick it off with just soaking up the moment, being happy that the saga is finally over and something that felt like it wasn't going to be over anytime soon. A report came out, I think maybe Saturday morning. Yeah, I think it was Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon-ish, that FAMU planned on announcing their hire on Monday. Well, clearly I'm here first thing Monday morning with the report already that they've hired him, right? Like they've already hired the guy. So that didn't happen. But when it was said that they were going to release this information or announce the hire on Monday, I was skeptical because it felt like, you know what? This thing will never end. But I'm glad that it did, and the news ended up breaking Saturday anyway. I think that was best because with everything happening, I can't confirm that it wouldn't have been leaked prior to FAMU making the announcement. So they did right to go ahead and announce that immediately. It's James Colzie. It's in-house. They didn't go out of the house. And I kind of felt like this was going to be the situation that we walked into because when Sean Gibbs was hired or announced that it was going to be hired, right? And we thought maybe they was trying to feel it out. I don't think that was the case. I think they had made their decision. It just wasn't well received. And eventually Sean Gibbs bowed out, which is what I had recommended him do that. A week prior to him doing it, I had been recommending that Gibbs just bow out of this race. It was not a good environment for him at all, right? But you go from there and you see the feedback, and I just had extreme doubt that AD Sykes would then go back out of the house to get another hire. It just felt like from the moment that Gibbs said, I'm not doing it, I'm staying at Fort Valley, it felt as if James Colzie was the logical next step. You know, I know that there's some out of the house people that FAMU would have accepted, but there's no one they would have accepted like an in-house candidate, specifically Colzie and Roll. And I always felt like Colzie had the edge over Roll. It just was a gut feeling. I didn't have any inside information or anything of that sort. I just kind of had that feeling. So the FAMU alum are going to get what they want, an in-house candidate, continuity, right? And when I look at it, this is why I said the firm was the best thing for them. Let's be very clear. People will say this could have been happening immediately. No, I would agree with you if there was indecisiveness. I would agree with you if it took a month to hire. First off, a month isn't even that bad, in my opinion, as far as hiring a coach. But when it's public, like I said with Texas Southern, that's when a month feels like 2-3 months because everything's playing out in the public. But I would agree with you if you said this could have been happened if there was indecisiveness. But there was decisiveness, and AD Sykes knew who she wanted. This process was necessary in order to get here. I don't think you get here without Gibbs being hired and bowing out and then going to the coaching search, not with all the pieces that are at play. If you were doing the hiring, we might have got there without the process, but you aren't the one making that call. And with the person who is making that call, I think a search needed to go into place. And when they posted Colzie's resume, and it was very interesting, two things in particular really caught my eye. One, he has a long, storied career being in positions of leadership. That tells me what I need to know about him being a leader. 5 years into his coaching career, he started at FIU, and 5 years into it, he was an assistant head coach, or excuse me, he was a special teams coordinator. The next year, he was an assistant head coach. He's been in positions of leadership, even if it's not head coach, for a long time and immediate. It spoke volumes to one of the quicker reactions that he was able to get out of somebody. Somebody looked at him after a couple of years and said, you are a leader. I want that in my head coach, right? The second thing that really interested me is that he made the jump to FAMU from Canada. He spent 8 of the 9 years before coming to Florida A&M coaching in Canada, right? Whether it was as a head coach or as a special teams coordinator, maybe it was defensive coordinator, but he was a coordinator at one spot, came to the States for a year, went back to Canada, and was a head coach for 6 years. There were split results and everything to that, but when he did succeed, he did succeed on a high level. I'll say that. It was kind of a lot of volatility. It was either all the way right or all the way left, but he did go all the way, and I think that you can't really look at what he did in that realm. I don't know how transferable it is, honestly. But I'll say one thing that is transferable, and it's the theme of continuity. Oh, I wanted to say this. I don't think that blame or credit can be applied to Tiffany Dawn Sykes in this situation. It's just got to be something that's not on her record. If Colzie is bad, whatever. If Colzie is great, whatever. You can't attribute that to Dawn Sykes, AD Dawn Sykes, right? You have to attribute that to nobody, really, because you can't attribute it to the fam, like the alumni. You can't do that. Like, it's just got to be out there. And then whatever you decide about her, you decide about her. But this has to be a separate thing. She didn't want it. The coaching searching firm, they were the ones who really got this, in my opinion. I believe everybody was heard out, and that's how we got here. But I don't think we can really put that on her. Maybe if it works out, you can say she had the forethought to go get a coaching search firm or whatever. But overall, this is not on her record, not on her resume when I'm evaluating her. Now, one thing I was about to say is that you have the continuity factor. Everybody talks about continuity when staying in-house. I want to look at the continuity that FAMU receives from this, but then also take it a step further, because I genuinely believe when looking at the 2024 roster, there was not a better hire than James Colzie, period. Not a better hire than James Colzie, period. And I would even say not even Billy Roll, but they would have a lot of similarities. But I'll keep it at that. James Colzie is the best hire for this roster, and we'll explain why as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. I don't know if you're trying to enhance your car. I don't know if you're trying to fix your car. Either one of those options happens all the time, and either one of those options can be solved at ebaymotors.com. Now, don't know if you need a carbonator, don't know if you need an alternator, don't know if you need an exhaust kit, don't know if you need LED lights, right? Anything in between. Maybe you just want to look good. You want your peak performance, and you want to look at its peak aesthetic as well. That's why you go to eBay Motors, because I'll tell you this, I've been living too long to still only be concerned about getting from point A to point B. I'm trying to get from A to B with a couple of people looking at me. That's what I'm trying to do. And with that, I could go to eBay Motors. Make sure that I get the car that's going to look nice, that's going to turn heads, right? I can get the car that's going to get me there. All I have to do is go to ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it for your second listen, you need to make it Locked On Sports Today, the first of its kind, 24/7 sports network on YouTube. Doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m., 7 p.m., you can go ahead and catch you something on Locked On Sports Today. So go ahead and subscribe. We know James Colzie is the coach. And you've heard continuity 10 times over. I'm not going to beat you over the head with the idea of continuity. We do have to establish what that means. I do find it necessary to establish what that means, but I want to take it to another level that I haven't heard enough people really discussing when talking about why they want James Colzie or the benefit of James Colzie. So let's look at the immediate impact that James Colzie has on FAMU. When I say immediate, I mean next week. That's how immediate I'm referencing. I don't just mean 2024 as a whole. I mean going into next week. People speak about continuity, and I think I underemphasized the importance or the impact of continuity in this situation, right? Because a lot of times when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about coaches. Okay, but you don't have Willie Simmons. I'm thinking you don't have Jeremy Musa at quarterback. You're missing a good amount of people. And because of that, I was kind of not all the way on the continuity train. That's why I was so much do a full search and look at everybody. Because I'm sitting here like there's so many moving pieces, especially on the collegiate ranks. Continuity isn't continuity to me. But I also think I didn't think about the roster as much. I didn't think about the coaching staff. I did think about the coaching staff turnover, but not in the sense of recruitment. So let's look at what happens with the current roster prior to National Signing Day. Now that James Colzie is here, I don't think you see anybody enter the portal. You might see Gentle Hunt come out of the portal, right? Because it's no coincidence that Hunt went in the portal right after Simmons announced his departure. That's not a coincidence. That didn't just, oh, well, maybe. I can guarantee you those things are linked. But now that Colzie is here, somebody's familiar with, there's no more unknown. I know Colzie. I know him well. Am I going to stay? It's really that simple. And I think that when I say I underemphasize the importance, not just to you, but to myself, because I wasn't thinking about the quality of players who could transfer if the coaches left. I knew that a mass exodus wasn't all the way going to happen. There was a limit on how many people could leave, but I knew you would miss some people. But what I didn't think about is the fact that, especially when you're looking at today, because National Signing Day is a week away. These guys who waited it out, if you got an out-of-house candidate, the majority of them aren't going to have a market when they enter the portal. Like it's just too close. I don't know if they'll be able to get into the situation they really want by signing day, right? And I think a lot of them would want to have that done by signing day, get into spring practice. Because I think, don't quote me, but I believe you have to get it done by signing day to be a part of spring practice. But then the ones who would have got a market are some of your marquee players, and that would have hurt you the most. I didn't think about that. I thought about quantity of players, not quality of players. So that's something that I had to look at when thinking about this move after it had already happened, the potential impact that you avoided from there. But outside of that continuity, what about building? I know that they're still recruiting. They didn't stop recruiting just because they didn't have a permanent head coach. FAMU is still going to people's houses. They're still sending their recruits out. James Colzie is likely the one who is meeting with these people as far as the coach goes. Because of that, you have some people who are just, I'm going to FAMU, period. Then you have some people who are on the fence. Those people who are on the fence are more likely to sign to be a Rattler now that they have somebody who is familiar, somebody who is still talking to them. Matter of fact, if you hire, let's just say you hire Darian Gray, right? Let's just say the Mouth of the South was the new head coach of FAMU, something we know isn't going to happen. You hire me, I might not even have that kid's position coach yet. Why would I want them, or why would I expect them? Of course I want them, but why would I expect them to come in? I don't know if personnel is going to change. They could go from they could go to a different type of defense, go to a different type of offense. We feel as if things are going to stay the same. So all of the reasons you are already interested in FAMU are still present. That's why James Colzie allows you to have the same roster. I would assume, or the best roster, I would assume that Billy Rowe would have something similar, but I don't think that Billy Rowe will have established the connection with these kids that Colzie did. And I believe that that could have had a very minor impact. However, when you're this close, you have to use those minor things to really split them up, right? It's splitting hairs. And that's why I think that Colzie provides you the best roster, the best top to bottom. I don't know about coaching and all of those things. We'll see that a couple of, games and years down the line on the coaching aspect. But when it comes to assembling your 2024 roster, I think he helps you with not having the guys who are already on your team leaving. And I think he also helps you continue to recruit the guys you've already been recruiting as well as possible this close to National Signing Day. That's next Wednesday. So I think James Colzie was the right hire for that aspect of it. But enough of FAMU. I'm sure we'll probably find something else down the line to look at when it comes to this, because it's like a scary movie. When you think it's over, they're going to come back with another rendition, but we're not going to look ahead that way. We're going to take a look back at Saturday, because Norfolk State women's basketball just pulled off a major victory over Coppin State that had ramifications for those two teams, and then also Howard as well. We'll look at those ramifications as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. We have our Super Bowl. It is the Kansas City Chiefs versus the San Francisco 49ers. I always knew this was going to be the case. I saw it coming. I didn't need to read the script, but everybody thinks it is. How many people lost money saying that the Lions had it when they were up 17 going into the half? How many people lost money thinking that this isn't Mahomes' year? I think that these two teams probably lost a lot of people money in the championship games, but that's okay, because if you're new to FanDuel, it doesn't matter if they lost you a couple of dollars, because you still got $150 back in bonus bets to make it up. This is what I'm telling you to do with your bonus bets. If you lost, then come back to the Super Bowl and go ahead and make some money in that event. Or maybe you don't want to wait 2 weeks. You got NBA every single day for the next 2 weeks as we gear up to be able to watch the Super Bowl. So go to FanDuel.com/locked on. If you're new to FanDuel, you get $150 back in bonus bets, win or lose. So nobody's really a loser. Go to FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Let's look at this Norfolk State versus Coppin State women's basketball game, because this was a big-time matchup in the MEAC, and it had a lot of ramifications. The reason this was so major is you're taking Coppin State, who at the time was undefeated, and then you're taking Norfolk State, who was just a game under at 2-1. Yeah, they were at 2-1 while Coppin State was at 3-0. So now, obviously, Norfolk State is immediately looking, I got to go and I got to beat this team so that I can be ahead of them, right? Or at least tied with them. That's the immediate thought. But then it gets a lot messier once you start involving Howard, because Howard was also at 2-1, right? They lost their first game against North Carolina Central, but then they were on a 2-game win streak. Well, now Howard wins. So now you got Coppin State, who lost the game at 3-1. You have Norfolk State, who won the game at 3-1. And then you have Howard, who wasn't in the game, but they've rattled off 3 in a row, and now they're sitting at 3-1. So you got 3 teams at the top of MEAC women's basketball with 1 loss. What's interesting about it, though, is you have Howard versus Coppin State tonight. So I think that game comes on at 5:30. That's the game that will really wrap up this miniature storyline, right? Like, it's like a mini arc, because yes, you had this game against Coppin State and Norfolk State on Saturday that we could look at, But we have to make sure we got this in on Monday, because Monday you're going to have another part of that story that really begins to unfold and tell a bigger picture, because you have Norfolk State, Howard, and Coppin State tied. At the end of tonight, there will be a number one. There will be two teams at most who are tied for one, but there will be an easy tiebreaker, and you know who's sitting at the top of the conference. If Norfolk State wins, this is all with the understanding that they win, right? If they win this game, they'll be 4-1. The winner of the Coppin State, let's say let's say Howard beats Coppin State, they'll be 4-1. And Howard will have the number one spot because they beat Norfolk State. Let's say Coppin State wins the game. Norfolk State will have the top spot because they beat Coppin State. So, like, at the end of tonight, there will be a clear number one, and there could be two teams tied, but the tiebreaker will be simple. But let's get into today's game, or this weekend's game specifically. Once again, it's the duo of Diamond Johnson and Kiera Wheeler. That's the duo that really drives them. It's the only two players who are scoring, who are averaging over 10 points. It's the only one, the only double-digit scorers per game basis, right? Diamond Johnson and Kiera Wheeler. And I think something that's interesting is they made this game, or they won this game coming off of where Wheeler was the defensive player of the year and Johnson was just the player of the week. It was just flipped 2 weeks prior to that. You had Wheeler, who was the player of the week, and you had Johnson, who was the defensive player of the week. These two players have been on such a roll since Johnson has come into the lineup towards the end of 2023, right? At the end of the calendar year. So basically, I think she played 2 games prior to coming into conference play. These two have been on a roll ever since, repeatedly getting 20 points in a game, right? Not both of them, but usually one or the other. I should have looked at how many of the 9 games they played together did at least one of them score 20 points. I'm betting at least 7, and I think it's 8. I looked at both of their scoring, but I think it's 8 because Johnson by herself has scored in 7 games over 20 points, 7 or 6. So, like, yeah, it's a high number. But in this game, she scored 22. And she was just really a scorer. She didn't do as much. She did get a steal, which continues her streak. She's had a steal in every single game she's played this year. And you look at Wheeler, who's had averages 18 and 10, had 14 and 12 in this game. She got her blocks in this game, 3 blocks in there. And she's a monster on the inside, dominating on the boards, dominating defensively. And overall, this game was won in the third quarter. In the third quarter, you see Norfolk State outscore Coppin State by 11 points. It's the only one of the 4 quarters that wasn't close point-wise. The final quarter, they scored 20 and 21 with Norfolk State winning that by 1. You look at the 4-point lead that Coppin State had coming into the halftime. First quarter decided by 3. Next quarter decided by 1. This was so tightly contested that the one time you had a big gap in between the two teams was the third quarter, and that was the deciding factor and was the performance of those 2 star players overall in a game that went ahead and swayed the direction of the Spartans. So we'll see what the story says at the end of tonight. That's why I'm going to be a little brief with this, and we'll probably revisit this tomorrow. But what we'll definitely visit tomorrow is Sundiata Anderson. He has been a shining star in the East-West Shrine Bowl practices. I've been there myself, so I'll bring you what I've seen from the field. But I can tell you right now that nothing that'll happen tomorrow will take away from the fact that Sundiata Anderson has been the star of the HBCU class at the Shrine Bowl. Maybe I'll just mention somebody else as well. But in the meantime, in between time, I got to get to practice. And you got to wait for my practice updates. But I appreciate you for taking this time with me. If you're looking for me in the meantime, in between time, go ahead and catch me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.